10th episode of Learning Kitchen Live, and as always, we are super excited to be here with you this week. My name is Valerie. I'm the manager of nutrition here at Community Servings, and I am very excited about what we're going to learn today. Today's topic is going to be, I'm going to talk a little bit about clean eating and what that exactly means, but I'm going to make a recipe. It is any vegetable and any protein stir fry. So my goal is to teach you today a basic stir fry technique that you can use with literally almost any kind of protein or vegetable that you want. And once you have this technique down, you're gonna be able to whip up these really delicious and healthy dinners in no time at home, using hopefully a lot of things that you already have on hand. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And again, this is Learning Kitchen Live, episode 10. I can't believe we've gotten here. It's so much fun. Stir fries are great in many ways. If you've never made one at home before, you shouldn't, first of all, be intimidated by it. You don't need a wok. You don't really need any special equipment. I find a non-stick skillet to be my favorite thing to stir fry in. Some people prefer not non-stick. Some people have woks, but this is my preference. A non-stick skillet, some tongs, and just some basic ingredients that once you have them on hand, you'll be able to put this together really easily anytime. And the other thing I like about this recipe is that it's a great way to use up some produce that might be a little bit past its prime, and I'll talk more about that later. But if you'll remember, a few weeks ago, my colleague Beth, when she was teaching about food sustainability and not generating too much food waste, she made some great recipes, a gazpacho and a banana pancake using some produce that was a little bit beyond its beyond looking really good. This is another great way to use things up. You don't want to use food that's rotten, obviously, but when things get a little wilty or limp in your refrigerator, this is an excellent way to use them up. So for this stir fry that I'm going to make, I am using chicken thighs because it's my favorite form of chicken to use in stir fries, and I'm going to use some celery, carrot. I found some leek and some kale, and I'm going to put all of that together with a really delicious marinade and stir fry it up, and it goes really quickly. So to start, I am going to make the marinade sauce, and half of this is going to go over the chicken right now, and then the other half is going to be reserved and added to the stir fry later. So to start, I have 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, low sodium soy sauce. And if you're really watching your sodium, you could use something called liquid aminos in this in place of it. They're like a soy sauce substitute, but low in sodium. You can find them actually in most grocery stores now, and they taste very similar. But I'm using regular soy sauce, and I'm going to put in 3 tablespoons of rice vinegar. And rice vinegar it's a nice mild vinegar, but if you didn't have that, you could use white wine vinegar in this too. You could probably even use apple cider vinegar and it would be okay. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of sesame oil, and this is kind of one of those sort of indulgent ingredients that it's a little more expensive than regular oils, but it has a really good flavor, and a little bit goes a long way. So this bottle, like a bottle this size, will last me at home probably several months, and I use it pretty frequently. So what I'm going to add is 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. And I am going to add 3 teaspoons of, I don't have a teaspoon measure, so I'm going to kind of guesstimate here. I'm going to add 3 teaspoons of light brown sugar, just to give it a little bit of sweetness. And again, you could use regular sugar if you didn't have brown sugar on hand. You could use dark brown sugar. It's all good. That's what makes this really versatile. You can substitute a lot of things and it's still really tasty. All right, so I'm going to take about half of this and pour it over my chicken. And what I also have is 3 cloves of garlic and 3 tablespoons of fresh ginger that I minced. And I'm going to put about half of each in here as well, and then save the other half for the stir fry itself. So this is just going to sit for like 20 minutes. It doesn't need to sit for very long. Same thing if you were using beef or pork or tofu or some other meat substitute. Just let it sit for about 20 minutes and it'll absorb some of the flavor of that. So next we're going to address our vegetables. What I like doing with stir fries is doing some kind of combination of crunchy things and then the leafy greens, which will wilt and be a little softer. So for the crunchy part of this, I'm going to do a couple of stalks of celery, and they can just be a rough chop. And then I found when I was here at Community Servings over the summer, we're really fortunate and we get a lot of produce donated from local farms. So I found this really lovely carrot, I found some leek, and I found this beautiful kale, which was actually pretty wilted yesterday. It came back to life, but we're going to put it in anyway. And so I found these vegetables. I thought they would all taste good in this. And again, this is what makes this super versatile. If you wanted to use bok choy or a different green, you certainly could. You don't have to follow the crunchy and wilted version of this either. Anything kind of goes. So while I'm cutting some of these vegetables, I want to take a minute and talk a little bit about the idea of clean eating. And this is something that as dietitians we see come up all the time. And I think it was last week that Beth talked a little bit about organic produce. And this is, I'm going to mention probably some of the concepts that she talked about too. So clean eating doesn't have a real definition. It's sort of a philosophy of how one should maybe eat. And the idea behind it is to eat food in its least processed state. So as close to its original version as possible. You see, like I was kind of playing around online. If you go to Amazon and Google clean eating, it pulls up hundreds of books, mostly cookbooks and diet books about like how to eat clean and what to do to clean up your diet. You'll kind of hear it referenced in that way a lot. And it's a little complicated because a lot of people probably don't really need to clean up their diet. They're just fine, but are like the idea of eating food that is more whole and less processed. So, and I think that's a great idea, but the thing you should be aware of is that there's really no one definition of what it means to eat clean. By the way, I'm just cutting up a leek here that I had cleaned beforehand. And for those of you unfamiliar with leeks, the one thing you want to make sure of is that when you wash it, you separate it out and get all the sand that's on the inside, because they are super sandy when you buy them. So I'm just going to use about half of this leek. So there's what I like to think of as a processed food continuum. So when food, and an apple is actually a perfect example of how to explain this. If you pick an apple off of a tree that is from a local farm and eat it right there, that is like about as minimally processed as that piece of food can get. So, plucked right from a tree by you, didn't travel anywhere, nothing's happened to that apple, and you eat it and it's hopefully delicious. The other end of the apple spectrum would be something like apple juice that you buy in the grocery store that might be 10% actual apple and then a lot of corn syrup or sugar, water, color, maybe with a vague apple flavor. So there's I think when I think of an apple, I think of those two things as the spectrum of processing. And there's a lot of things in the middle there. There's that apple that you plucked from the tree. There's an apple that you buy at the grocery store that might have traveled across the country to get to you, but still a whole apple. There's apple sauce, which is the apples that are, then cooked down and made into a tasty treat. And then there's apple cider, which is still a processed drink, but much less processed than the apple juice that I just referenced. And the idea with clean eating is that you want to eat most foods as often as possible closer to the whole apple that you picked off the tree end of the spectrum than the apple juice end of the spectrum. So when possible, eating foods in their most natural state. And I think in general, without even having a philosophy like clean eating behind it, that's a good idea for most people. When you eat foods in their most natural state, they're healthier, they're less processed, they have less additives. You can control what you're eating a little better, so you'll end up with less sodium, less added sugar, less added or unhealthy fats. So that's kind of the benefit of following a philosophy like clean eating. Being able to control what you're eating and having the food in its most natural state. The thing that you should consider, though, with that is to not obsess over it. I read this somewhere that eating clean is paying attention and being mindful about the food choices you're making, but not obsessing about it. Because, certainly eating the apple, whether you picked it off the tree or whether it traveled across the country, is going to be better for you than not eating the apple at all. So, and I think Beth referenced some of this when talking about organic foods. It's better to eat the fruits and vegetables, whether they're organic or not, than to not eat them at all. And clean eating is kind of the same philosophy. So I am almost done chopping my vegetables, and I'll talk a little bit more about clean eating as I get this stir fry going. But what I have here now is a couple of cups of nice crunchy vegetables. So there's some celery, about a half a leek, and a half of what was a really giant carrot. So I'm going to go ahead and get this going. So first thing is you want to heat the pan up over medium-high heat and get it pretty hot. And I am going to add 1 tablespoon of canola oil to this. And you can really use any oil that you want. Peanut oil would be fine. I prefer, canola has a higher smoke point than things like olive oil, so that's why I like using it for stir fries. But again, anything goes here. And I also, there's another pot on the stove here. I also made some brown rice ahead of time to serve with the stir fry, but I think because I like having a little more substance if I'm eating a stir fry for dinner, but I think any whole grain works great. I made brown rice. You could use quinoa, farro, really anything that you had. I particularly like brown basmati rice. It's not always easy to find, but that's really delicious when you can find it. So I'm just going to give this a second to heat up. And then the first thing that we're going to add is the meat or the protein. So whenever you're doing the stir fry, by this method, go ahead and cook your meat or protein first. And then it actually leaves some really crunchy, good tasting bits in the bottom of the pan that'll flavor the rest of the stir fry. So I'm going to go ahead and add my chicken. So I'm just going to spread this out in the pan and let it cook for a few minutes. So when thinking about clean eating, if you think about it in terms of different categories of food, it's easy to make some choices that are more whole in all, more of the whole food version of food in most categories. So things like fruits, eating whole fruits is always going to be a better choice than processed fruits, but some fruit is better than no fruit. So if you don't have access to fresh fruit, frozen fruit, or even fruit cup packed in water or natural juice is an okay choice for most people. And then in terms of vegetables, I think are maybe the one food group where more is more. Um, most people don't eat enough fruits and vegetables in general. I'm probably making a broad generalization there, but vegetables, more is more. And fresh vegetables are great, but frozen vegetables are also fantastic. You could make a stir fry like this and use all frozen vegetables, and it would come out delicious. You could buy frozen chopped like onions and broccoli and spinach and do this exact same technique, and it would be delicious. And even canned vegetables are good too. Low sodium is better. If that's not possible, rinsing them before you eat them. But again, vegetables, more is more no matter how you get them. And then things like dairy products. Dairy products are, if you choose to eat cow's milk dairy, they're all good. I still think lower fat dairy products are a better choice than full fat in most cases for most people. So, but having, again, having access to that is important. And if you don't eat real dairy or cow's milk dairy, dairy alternatives are fine too. A little more processed, but still okay. And then things like meats, you want to cut the fat off. What I didn't show you what I was doing here, I bought boneless, skinless chicken thighs, but they actually did have a lot of fat on them, and I just trimmed them a little before I ate them. You would want to do the same if you're using beef or pork. You would want to trim the fat off. When cooking with fats, again, just using things that are recognizable. So like canola oil, olive oil, peanut oil, oils that are maybe not as processed. Use, minimally add things like shortening to things. And I should pause for a moment once again and reintroduce what we're doing here. This is Learning Kitchen Live, episode 10, and we're making a delicious stir fry. And we're talking a little bit about clean eating and what it means to eat clean and minimally processed foods. And my name is Valerie. So this is cooking up nicely. When you do a stir fry with meat, you want to make sure you cook the meat in its entirety before you take it out of the pan. So you don't want to like partially. I don't like partially cooking things, particularly chicken and pork. So make sure it's cooked really good. And if you're using tofu or a meat alternative, just get it nice and browned up. So this just has a couple more minutes to go. And so I've been talking a little bit about the idea of eating clean, and I think it's important to focus on not so much about making sure your food is 100% organic and hasn't been, touched by anybody except the person who harvested it, but more important to think about eating foods in their least processed state, and eating plenty of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, kind of like we've been saying all along through Learning Kitchen Live. Like this is just a general healthy way of eating. And not obsessing about it. I think, as a dietitian, I do see people who get really caught up in, I won't eat that if it's been processed at all, or if it's not 100% organic. And while that's okay, you don't want to not eat foods that are healthy for you because they're not 100% organic or have been processed in any way, shape, or form. Processed foods can still be healthy. You just want to minimize them. All right, just another minute on this, and then we're going to start cooking up our vegetables. You may have questions about like what it would mean to eat something like meat, for example, that's like clean and not, or like what organic meat might look like. And I would say if you're able to buy meat that was raised locally, and and humanely, that's always ideal, but I still think you're better off eating protein that you like, that nourishes you, whether it's like organic or pasture raised or whatever, than not eating it at all. Sometimes meats that are raised that way, while delicious, they can be hard to come by, and they can also be really prohibitively expensive for some people, but they're a great choice if you have them available to you. This happens to be regular old like store brand chicken, and I'm pretty sure it's fine. Something I do like looking for with meat in particular and dairy products, cow's milk dairy, is look for meat that has had no hormones added. That's actually a very easy thing you can do, and most producers will make a note that their product has had no hormones added to it. And that's an easy way to make sure the meat you're eating has been minimally dealt with. All right, just one more minute, and I think this is good. When you're cooking chicken and pork, you want to make sure that the pink from the inside is all gone. So it's good to look at the inside of some of the thicker pieces and make sure that they are cooked through. I just have just another minute. I realize I didn't get a bowl to put this in when it was done cooking, and I'm wondering if one of my colleagues in the background is going to go grab me one anyway. And once again, if you're just tuning in, this is Learning Kitchen Live, and we are making a veggie and protein stir fry. This smells so good. I wish you could smell it. It's like the garlic and the ginger and the sesame oil really lends a nice smell. It's going to give a really nice flavor to this. All right, just one more minute and we'll be good, I think. Yep, almost all cooked through. So the basic technique is we're going to cook the protein, and then we're going to cook the vegetables, add some of the sauce back in, and then add the protein back in, and it'll be done. So the rest of this is going to go really quickly. The protein in this case is taking the longest to cook. But truly, you can make a dinner like this and go from beginning food prep to having it on the table in under 30 minutes. So I would love to know if anyone's watching, if you have favorite stir fries. So feel free to chat in and along with us, and someone will get your question to me, because there are like a bazillion different ways to do stir fries and different sauces. In my house, if I was making this, I would have dumped a whole lot of Sriracha into that marinade, because we like food to be we actually just really like spicy food. I am going to put a few chili flakes in this to give it a little flavor, but that is totally optional. And you can also add things like hoisin sauce makes this taste really good too. Someone has a question.
What's your opinion on soy sauce?
That's a good question. The question was, what is your opinion on soy sauce? It's delicious and flavorful. Low sodium is preferable, and you have to be careful if you're watching how much sodium is in your diet. 2 tablespoons of soy sauce in this recipe actually made the sodium pretty high. I mean, there's sodium coming from other things like the vegetables, but most of it was coming from the soy sauce. You just need to be mindful, especially if you're worried about how much salt is in your diet. There's also different versions of soy sauce. There's gluten-free, there's all kinds of different, there's all kinds of varieties out there, organic, not organic, but I would say be mindful of the sodium, and that's why I mentioned the liquid aminos at the beginning, because They are a good alternative, especially if you're watching how much sodium is in your diet. And I have a bowl. Thank you, Beth. I really appreciate that. All right, there's another question.
Someone asked, what's in your marinade?
What?
Somebody asked, what's in your marinade? They missed the beginning.
Oh, good question. Hang on, let me just dump this. This is a two-handed job because this is a giant pan. All right, there we go. I will answer that in 1 second. What I'm going to do is add the remaining oil that I have, about a tablespoon, and get these vegetables in here and cooking, and they're going to cook up pretty quick. So the marinade is soy sauce, rice vinegar, sesame oil, brown sugar, and then some garlic and ginger, fresh chopped ginger. And we will post the recipe in the comments section after we're done today, so you'll have the full recipe that I used there. But super simple, and I had said at the beginning too, if you don't have like rice vinegar, for example, you could use white wine vinegar, soy sauce or liquid aminos. Something that is actually really tasty is, I believe it's Chinese black vinegar. Beth, my colleague who does these as well, and I are big fans of that, but it still has a lot of sodium in it, so you just need to be careful. But all really good choices. All right, so these are gonna cook up just for a moment. They're gonna let them keep their crunch. I don't want them to get too soft. But this is a really good way to use up things like celery and carrots that might just be past their prime. Like they're getting a little like soft and limp in your fridge, and you may not want to just eat them whole. This is a good way to use it because they still taste great. They're just they've just lost some of their crunch, so you'll never notice it in this. The one thing, this maybe goes without saying, that you never want to use past its prime is meat. Please don't ever use spoiled meat in this. Doesn't matter how much you cook it, that is a bad idea. So just, you know, veggies, if they're wilted, great. They're still fine as long as they're not super moldy. Meat, no. All right, next I am gonna add this kale. I don't think I'm gonna add all of this. This was a pretty big head of kale. So I'm gonna add maybe about half, let it cook down, see how it looks. Leafy greens go from a huge volume to very little pretty quickly, so we're gonna see how this looks. And at this point, I'm actually gonna add, like I was just saying, a little bit of red chili flakes to this. But if you don't have to, this is totally optional. And you could add things like Sriracha, hot sauce, Tabasco, or nothing. If you were adding spice in the liquid form, I would say probably add it to the marinade. All right. I'll let this steam for a minute. This is a really good way to use kale for people who don't love kale. For some reason, even though I'm a dietitian, my family does not really like kale besides me. And we get a lot of it through like a CSA share, and it's good for you. It's objectively a really healthy food for you. When you put it in a stir fry like this, it almost takes some of the bitterness out of it, and they won't even, I mean, they'll know it's there, they'll know a leafy green is in there, but it's an easier way to get people to eat kale. You could use spinach, Swiss chard, mustard greens, collards. Any of those hearty leafy greens are going to be great in here. All right, these are cooking down beautifully. While this kale continues to cook, the next thing I'm going to do is add the rest of the garlic and ginger. So I had put about half in the marinade. I'm going to put the rest in here in the middle, and I'm going to just mash it up a little bit, let that cook. You don't want it to burn because burned garlic gets really bitter, but let it cook for a second. And then I am going to add the rest of the marinade. Remember, we only put about half on the chicken. And then I'm going to add the chicken back in. Let it heat up, add these juices in with it. And look at that. I'm just gonna, again, let this cook up for like 30 more seconds, and there is a beautiful stir fry. It smells wonderful. I don't mean to keep rubbing that in, but it really, like, it's so fragrant and delicious. Super easy dinner to make. I love making these, when you do something like a stir fry, I actually like doubling the recipe sometimes, and then there's leftover stuff like this holds up really well for leftovers for dinner or lunches during the coming week. And that's it. I'm going to plate this up with a little bit of the brown rice that I had cooked. So some delicious brown rice. And this stir fry. So I hope you all enjoyed getting a quick lesson in stir fry technique and feel confident that you could do something like this at home. It really is this simple. And I hope you learned a little bit about clean eating as well. You know, again, it's the principle of eating food that is as minimally processed as possible, as often as possible, when it's available and affordable for you. And that's what makes for good health. So thank you again for joining us for Learning Kitchen Live. I've enjoyed being here today, and we'll see you next week.